Hey guys, tonight we're slipping under the wooden beams of a 17th-century Dutch workshop, where the air smells faintly of oil and sawdust, and time itself is being carved into brass and oak. You trudge barefoot across the cold floorboards, your breath visible in the pre-dawn chill. Because yes, your day starts before the sun even thinks about rising. This isn't some grand adventure with muskets and sea voyages. This is the quiet grind of a clockmaker in Delft, where precision matters more than poetry. Outside, the city is still wrapped in silence, broken only by the occasional groan of a windmill turning lazily in the distance. Inside, you light a single candle with shaking fingers, its flickering glow casting long shadows over shelves lined with gears, weights, and tools that feel like old friends. You stretch stiff arms above your head, joints creaking like one of your own unfinished mechanisms. It's going to be a long day, and if you make even one tiny mistake, well, let's just say your customer won't be happy when their dinner bell rings at noon instead of 6. You probably won't survive this kind of life. Not because it's dangerous, though splinters from hand-carved would confester, but because the patience required to shape time itself would test the soul of even the most Zen monk. But hey, here you are, tying on your apron and reaching for the first cog of the day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment too, if you're feeling cozy. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is on your clock. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your hands move automatically, brushing dust off your workbench, the same one your father used before you. The wood is worn smooth from years of labor, the edges nicked from countless hours of filing, measuring, and assembling. A small wooden box sits to your left. Inside, a collection of screws, pins, and springs glint dully in the candlelight. To your right, a stack of parchment holds sketches of clock faces, pendulums, and intricate escapement mechanisms. Each line was drawn with care, each measurement double-checked. Mistakes here don't just mean wasted materials. They mean disappointed customers, missed deadlines, and maybe even a dent in your reputation. There's no rushing today, no frantic ticking yet, just the slow, deliberate ritual of preparing for the work ahead. You pick up a small iron file, testing its edge against your thumb. Sharp enough. Good. You'll need it later. For now, you reach for a cloth and a bottle of linseed oil, rubbing it gently into the wooden handles of your tools. They're not just instruments. They're extensions of your hands, trusted companions in the long dance of craftsmanship. Historians still argue whether these early Dutch clockmakers were seen as artists or mere tradesmen. Some say they were revered like painters, their clocks displayed proudly in homes like fine portraits. Others believe they were just another set of skilled hands in a bustling guild system, working long hours for modest pay. Either way, you know one thing, without people like you, cities wouldn't run on time. And in a place like Delft, where merchants and scholars alike depend on accurate hours, that matters more than you might think. You glance toward the window, where the sky is beginning to shift from black to a deep navy. Soon, the bells from the church tower will ring, signaling the start of the official workday. But until then, you have this quiet moment all to yourself. The candle sputters slightly, sending a wisp of smoke curling toward the ceiling. Outside, a rooster crows somewhere in the distance, nature's own alarm clock, far less precise but no less important. You take a deep breath, letting the familiar sense of your workshop settle into your lungs. This is your world, slow, steady, and filled with the promise of ticking seconds. And as you reach for the first piece of brass to inspect, you realize something simple, almost beautiful. Today, like every day, you will build time itself. You lift the brass cog from your workbench, its surface cool against your fingertips. The candlelight catches on its sharp edges, casting tiny flickers of light that dance across the wooden floor like fireflies trapped indoors. This is no ordinary piece of metal. It's part of a mechanism that will one day mark the passing of hours in someone's home, ticking steadily through birthdays, weddings, and quiet evenings by the fire. You turn it slowly in your hand, checking for any imperfections along the teeth. A single burr or uneven edge could throw off the entire rhythm of the clock. Before you can begin assembling anything, though, you need to make sure everything runs smoothly, literally. Oil is the lifeblood of a clockmaker's world, and you keep a small tin jar of it tucked away in an easy-to-reach drawer. With careful fingers, you unscrew the lid and dip the tip of a thin brush into the thick, amber liquid. The scent is faintly nutty, almost like old parchment soaked in warmth. It's not perfume, but it's familiar, comforting even. You start with the smallest gears first, brushing oil along the inner grooves where friction will eventually wear them down. Each drop spreads slowly, coating the brass in a thin, protective sheen. You move deliberately, never rushing this step. Rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to clocks that stop before they've barely begun. As you work, you remember the first time you tried this without supervision. You were 15, eager and clumsy, and you'd forgotten to oil the escapement wheel. By the end of the day, the clock had ground to a halt, its one steady tick reduced to a sad little stutter. Your father had said nothing at first, just watched as you frowned at your failure. Then he handed you another wheel and said, "Try again, and this time listen." So now, every morning you do. You listen to the silence between ticks, imagining how each part will move once the clock is whole. Historians still argue whether early Dutch clockmakers used animal fat or plant-based oils for lubrication. Some believe whale oil was common, given the Netherlands' thriving whaling industry. Others insist tallow or linseed oil was more practical, especially for smaller workshops that couldn't afford exotic imports. Either way, you know what works best for your hands, your tools, and the rhythms of your craft. You set the last oiled gear aside and reach for the pendulum rod resting in its cradle. It's long and slender, balanced perfectly so that when it swings, it moves with a grace that feels almost alive. You hold it up to the light, inspecting the fine etchings near the base. Marks left by previous makers, proof that this knowledge has been passed down through generations. You run your thumb over the metal, feeling the slight texture beneath your skin. Outside, the sky is lighter now, the navy giving way to soft grays and the first hints of gold. Soon, the city will stir. Bakers stoking their ovens, fishermen hauling in their nets, children yawning as they're nudged awake by tired parents. But here, in your workshop, the only movement is yours. The only sound is the occasional drip of oil onto wood, the soft sigh of your breath, and the distant hum of a world waking up somewhere beyond these walls. You glance at the shelves again, taking stock of what needs attention next. There's a half-assembled timepiece waiting patiently in the corner, its frame carved from dark oak and already showing signs of elegance. A customer commissioned it months ago, expecting perfection, and you intend to deliver. But not yet. Not until every gear is greased, every spring tested, and every measurement double-checked. Because in this line of work, there's no room for error. Only time, patience, and the steady rhythm of your own heartbeat guiding you forward. The first real light of morning slips through the narrow window, catching on the glass panes and scattering into soft golden beams that stretch across your workbench like fingers reaching for your tools. You blink against the brightness, letting your eyes adjust as you reach for a small brass square, its edges worn smooth from years of use. This is no ordinary ruler. It's a trusted companion in the art of precision. Its measurements etched deep into metal so even the faintest touch can tell you if something is off by the width of a hair. You lay the square against a strip of oak you've set aside for a clock case, aligning it carefully before marking a line with the tip of a sharp awl. The tool bites into the wood with a quiet click, leaving behind a tiny indentation that will guide your saw later. There's a rhythm to this: measure twice, mark once, never rush. It's not just about accuracy. It's about respect for the craft, for the generations who came before you, shaping time out of nothing but patience and skill. To your left, a pair of dividers rests beside a stack of parchment sketches. These aren't just for drawing circles. They're for measuring distances with an almost obsessive attention to detail. You pick them up, adjusting the legs until they match the width of the pendulum bob you'll be attaching later. Then, holding them steady, you press their points into the wood, leaving two perfectly spaced marks. A single mistake here could throw off the entire balance of the clock. And you know from experience, once a clock starts wobbling, it never quite regains its grace. Outside, the city stirs more fully now. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoes down the street, followed by the muffled voices of early market-goers greeting one another. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, then falls silent. But inside your workshop, the world remains still. The only sounds are the occasional creak of floorboards beneath your shifting weight and the rhythmic tapping of your awl as you mark another measurement. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers used imported or locally sourced woods for their cases. Some believe walnut was favored for its rich grain and durability, while others insist oak was more common due to its abundance. Either way, you know what works best for your hands, the way oak holds screws without splitting, how it polishes to a warm sheen under candlelight. Sturdy, dependable, much like the clocks you build. You glance at your sketch again, tracing the lines with a calloused fingertip. This design is intricate, meant to impress, not just with function, but with form. The customer who commissioned it wanted elegance, a piece that would sit proudly in his parlor, ticking away the hours like a quiet heartbeat. You intend to deliver exactly that. But before beauty comes structure, and before structure comes precision. You lift the brass square once more, double-checking your marks. Satisfied, you set it aside and reach for a fine-toothed saw, its blade dulled slightly from yesterday's work. You run your thumb along its edge, feeling for any nicks or uneven teeth. A dull blade isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it forces you to slow down, to be deliberate. And in this line of work, slowness is a virtue, not a flaw. The first cut begins gently, the saw gliding forward with practiced ease. You feel the resistance of the wood, hear the soft rasp of teeth biting into grain. With each stroke, you breathe in time with the motion, falling into the familiar cadence of creation. This is where the magic happens, not in grand gestures or sudden inspirations, but in the steady rhythm of measured cuts and careful assembly. As you work, you think back to the first time you ever held a pair of dividers in your hand. You were barely 10, standing beside your father as he adjusted the spacing on a gear train. He had placed the tool in your palm, guiding your fingers around the metal arms. "Measure everything," he had said. "Even the air between the gears matters." You hadn't understood him then. Now every day you do. The sunlight grows stronger, casting longer shadows across your bench. You pause for a moment, wiping sweat from your brow with the back of your sleeve. The scent of fresh cut wood fills the air, mingling with the lingering traces of oil and wax. Another day unfolding, another hour slipping by, measured not by bells or chimes, but by the steady hum of your own quiet labor. The floor beneath your feet is a patchwork of history. Layers of sawdust, wood shavings, and the occasional fleck of brass that escaped your careful grip. You've swept it 100 times, yet some pieces always remain, clinging to the grain like memories that refuse to fade. Each step you take stirs up tiny clouds of dust that catch in the morning light, swirling lazily before settling again, as if reluctant to leave this place of quiet creation. You move slowly through the workshop, your boots making soft thuds against the worn planks. Every inch of this space has a story, every corner marked by years of labor. To the left, near the window where the light is strongest, lies a small pile of curled oak shavings, left over from yesterday's carving. They curl like dried leaves, their edges rough with fresh cuts. You nudge one with the toe of your boot, watching it skitter across the floor before coming to rest beside a forgotten screw. To your right, a scattering of fine sawdust covers the ground like powdered snow, remnants from the delicate work you did earlier on the clock case. It clings to your trousers, to the hem of your apron, to the tips of your fingers. You don't mind. This is the price of craftsmanship, a constant reminder that no matter how precise your tools or steady your hands, there will always be traces of your labor left behind. You pause near the center of the room, letting your eyes follow the paths you walk most often. From the shelves where your tools hang in neat rows, to the bench where hours slip away unnoticed. Each route is familiar, mapped into your body like muscle memory. You know exactly where the loose board creaks underfoot, where the floor dips slightly toward the hearth, where the scent of oil lingers strongest in the air. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You watch it for a moment, then bend down to pick it up. The wood is still warm from being cut, its surface smooth along one side but rough where the blade caught it at an angle. You turn it over in your palm, imagining the shape it once had before becoming nothing more than debris. Even discarded pieces have their own quiet beauty. Historians still argue whether Dutch workshops were kept meticulously clean or allowed to accumulate layers of dust and debris over time. Some believe cleanliness was essential for precision, while others insist a certain amount of mess was inevitable in any craft that involved metal, wood, and oil. You know both are true. There are days when you sweep religiously, ensuring not a single speck interferes with your work. And then there are days like today, when the dust settles and stays, blending into the rhythm of your routine like an old friend. You toss the shaving into a small bin tucked beneath your bench, though you know it won't stay empty for long. There's always more to come. Always another cut to make, another gear to file, another piece of wood to shape into something that will tick steadily for decades to come. You glance at the shelves again, noting where your tools should be. A chisel rests slightly out of place, its handle sticking out too far. You reach for it, tucking it back into its proper spot with practiced ease. Your fingers brush against the wooden peg holding it in place, feeling the grooves worn deep by years of use. You remember when your father carved these pegs himself, shaping them by hand so each tool would sit just right. He believed everything had its place, that order was as important as skill. And he was right. When you need a file or a screwdriver in the middle of a delicate adjustment, there's no time for searching. Everything must be ready, waiting within arm's reach. You return to your bench, stepping carefully around the scattered remnants of your work. A thin layer of dust coats the seat of your stool, disturbed only by the imprint of your body from yesterday's labor. You settle onto it, brushing away the worst of the debris before reaching for your next task. The sun climbs higher outside, casting longer shadows across the floor. The day moves forward, measured not in minutes, but in the slow accumulation of tiny details. The placement of a tool, the fall of a shaving, the quiet rhythm of a life spent building time itself. You reach for the lead weight with both hands, lifting it carefully from its resting place on the shelf. It's heavier than it looks, solid, dense, shaped like a perfect cylinder with smooth edges that fit neatly into your palms. This isn't just any piece of metal. It's the heart of the clock's movement, the thing that will pull the gears forward with slow, steady precision. Without it, the mechanism would be nothing more than a collection of brass and wood, waiting for motion. You carry it to your workbench, setting it down gently beside the half-assembled pendulum rod. The weight rests with a quiet thunk, sending a tiny vibration through the wooden surface. You run your fingers along its cool surface, feeling the slight grain left behind by the mold in which it was cast. Lead is soft compared to iron or steel, but it holds its shape well, making it perfect for this kind of work. Some craftsmen prefer brass weights for their durability, but you've always found lead easier to balance. Softer on the hands, quieter when it swings. The pendulum itself is nearly complete. A slender brass rod extends upward, curving slightly at the top where it will connect to the escapement mechanism. At the bottom, two small hooks wait patiently to cradle the weight you now hold. You lift the pendulum assembly, balancing it carefully in one hand as you slide the lead weight into place. It fits snugly, secured by the tension of the hooks. You give it a gentle shake, testing its grip. Solid. Good. Now comes the real test, the first swing. You move to the corner of your workshop where a temporary support beam stands, holding up an unfinished wall section from last year's renovations. You've used it before for this exact purpose, a makeshift stand for testing pendulums before they find their final home inside a clock case. With careful hands, you attach the pendulum to a small bracket mounted on the beam, ensuring it hangs freely without obstruction. You take a step back, watching as the weight sways ever so slightly, disturbed only by the faintest draft sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. The movement is almost imperceptible at first, just a whisper of motion in the still air. Then, slowly, it begins to settle into its rhythm. One beat, another. The weight moves forward, then back, tracing an invisible arc through the morning light. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It's not yet synchronized with anything. It has no clock face to guide it, No chimes to mark the passing hours. But even now, there's something deeply soothing about the way it moves. It doesn't rush. It doesn't hesitate. It simply follows the pull of gravity, swinging with the same quiet grace that has guided timekeepers for centuries. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers preferred long or short pendulums for accuracy. Some believe longer ones offered greater stability, while others insist shorter pendulums responded better to changes in temperature and humidity. You know from experience that it depends on the space, the materials, and the intended use. But today, none of that matters. Today, all that exists is this moment, the slow, hypnotic dance of metal and motion, ticking forward like a heartbeat beneath your fingertips. Outside, the city continues to wake. Somewhere beyond these walls, a baker stokes his oven, a fisherman unties his boat, a child yawns into the crook of her arm. But here, in your workshop, time moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady. Predictable. Calm. You watch the pendulum for another minute, letting its rhythm sink into your bones. Then, satisfied, you reach out and stop its motion with a single fingertip. The weight halts instantly, suspended in midair for a brief second before settling into stillness. You leave your finger against it for a moment longer, feeling the faint warmth of the metal beneath your skin. Another task done, another piece in place. And still, the day stretches ahead, measured not in hours, but in the quiet certainty of knowing each tick brings you one step closer to completion. You reach for the brass wheel, its surface cool and slightly rough beneath your fingertips. It's one of several you've set aside for today's work, each waiting patiently to be shaped into something precise, something perfect. This one is unfinished, its teeth blunt and uneven, lacking the sharp symmetry that will soon allow it to mesh seamlessly with its counterparts. You hold it up to the light, watching as the morning sun catches on its edges, illuminating the tiny imperfections only a trained eye would notice. The file rests beside you, worn but reliable, its surface lined with fine grooves meant to carve away metal one whisper-thin layer at a time. You pick it up, testing its edge against your thumb before settling into position. Your left hand holds the wheel steady, fingers curled around its outer rim, while your right moves in slow, deliberate strokes across the teeth. The motion is rhythmic, back and forth, like the pendulum you tested just moments ago. Each pass of the file removes only the smallest amount of material, shaping the teeth into smooth, even ridges. You can feel the resistance beneath your palm, hear the faint scrape of metal against metal. There's no rushing this part. Too much pressure, and you risk thinning the teeth too much, making them prone to breakage. Too little, and they'll never engage properly with the gears they're meant to drive. Balance is everything. You pause after a few strokes, setting the file down and lifting the wheel again. Holding it at an angle, you inspect the teeth under the shifting light. Still not quite right. You turn it slightly, noting where the edges still appear dull or misshapen. With careful fingers, you return it to the bench and begin again. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers used hand-cut or machine-tooled gears in the 17th century. Some believe early lathes were employed for basic shaping, while others insist most work was done manually, requiring immense skill and patience. Either way, you know what it takes to do this right: hours of focus, years of practice, and the kind of precision that comes only from repetition. As you work, your mind drifts briefly to the first time you ever filed a gear by hand. You had been 12, standing beside your father as he guided your fingers over the metal, showing you how to hold the file at just the right angle. "Too steep," he had said, adjusting your wrist. "You'll wear it down too fast." You had frowned in concentration, determined to get it right. And when you finally did, when the teeth aligned just so, and the wheel spun smoothly between your fingers, that moment had felt like magic. A small pile of brass shavings has begun to collect near the edge of your bench, delicate curls of metal that catch the light like flecks of gold dust. You brush them away absently, letting them fall onto the floor where they join the rest of the day's debris. No need to sweep yet. There will always be more to come. You take another look at the wheel in your hand, turning it slowly. Better now, but not quite finished. One more pass, then another. You lose yourself in the rhythm of it, the steady cadence of file against brass, the quiet hum of concentration filling the space around you. Outside, the city continues to stir. Somewhere beyond these walls, a cart rattles over cobblestones, its wooden wheels creaking under the weight of fresh produce. A child laughs somewhere down the street, followed by the muffled scolding of a parent. But here, in your workshop, the world remains still. The only movement is yours, the slow, measured dance of creation unfolding beneath your hands. When at last you are satisfied, you set the wheel aside and reach for the next one. Another blank slate, another shape waiting to be revealed. You pick it up, feeling its weight settle into your palm, and begin again. The file rests on the bench beside you, its worn grooves catching the morning light like tiny ridges in a field of brass. The last wheel is set aside, its teeth sharpened to perfection, and now comes the hardest part, waiting. You lean back against your stool, folding your arms across your chest as you survey the small pile of freshly filed gears before you. They look ready, eager even, but they won't be useful just yet. Not until the wood dries. You glance toward the corner where the clock's case sits upright, its frame still bare, waiting for its final coat of linseed oil. The scent lingers in the air, nutty, warm, slightly sweet, and you can already imagine how it will darken the grain once fully absorbed. Oak takes time to settle into its finish, especially when applied by hand. Rushing it would mean a finish that cracks or peels within months. And you've never been one for shortcuts. So instead of reaching for another task, you let yourself pause. Just for a moment, your hands, still dusted with fine brass shavings, rest lightly on your knees. Outside, the city continues its slow awakening. But in here, time stretches like taffy, thinning out into something soft and malleable. This is the kind of quiet that only exists between projects, the in-between space where nothing happens, and yet everything does. You reach for the small wooden cup resting near the edge of your workbench, lifting it carefully. The beer inside is lukewarm now, warmed by the heat of your workshop and the passage of time. It's not fancy stuff, just the same brown ale you always keep on hand. Something simple, something reliable. You take a slow sip, letting the familiar bitterness roll over your tongue before swallowing. A bit stale, maybe, but comforting all the same. You glance at the ticking of yesterday's success. A small table clock sitting proudly on a nearby shelf. Its pendulum sways gently, casting faint shadows that shift with the movement of the sun outside. You built this 1 week ago, testing every gear, polishing every surface until it gleamed. And now it runs like a dream. No hiccups, no stutters, just steady, dependable motion. You remember the first time you ever left a finished clock running overnight. You had been 16, full of nerves and second-guessing, convinced that any moment it would stop without warning. But it didn't. You woke the next morning to the sound of its gentle tick, and something about that moment had settled deep in your bones. That was the day you stopped feeling like an apprentice and started believing in yourself as a maker of time. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers drank while working, or if such habits were frowned upon in guild settings. Some say alcohol dulled the senses too much for precision work, while others insist a little warmth helped steady shaky hands. You know better than to rely on it. But sometimes, a quiet sip in the middle of the morning feels less like indulgence and more like ritual. A fly buzzes lazily near the window, bouncing off the glass before drifting toward the ceiling. You watch it for a moment, amused by its aimless dance through the air. Somewhere behind you, a loose floorboard creaks under the weight of nothing at all. The silence isn't empty. It's full of tiny sounds, the kind that only reveal themselves when there's nothing louder to drown them out. You set your cup down, listening to the distant chime of a church bell echoing from somewhere beyond the rooftops. Mid-morning, maybe, or close enough. You don't need to check the hour, not yet. There's no rush today, no deadlines breathing down your neck. Just the slow, steady rhythm of craftsmanship unfolding around you. And so you sit, you breathe, you listen, because sometimes the most important part of making time is learning how to wait for it. The scent of rye bread and pickled herring fills your nose as you step into the small dining room, leaving behind the quiet hum of your workshop. The air here is warmer, carrying the comforting aromas of breakfast, freshly baked bread, simmering stew, and the faint tang of vinegar from last night's preserved vegetables. You pull out a chair at the worn wooden table, settling into it with a sigh that feels like letting go of tension you didn't realize you were holding. Across from you, your wife sits with a bowl of steaming broth in her hands, blowing gently on its surface before taking a careful sip. She looks up as you sit, offering a small smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. You know she's already thinking about the day ahead, the laundry to hang, the children to dress, the market to visit. Life moves quickly for those who don't build it by hand. To your left, your eldest son fidgets in his seat, poking at a slice of cheese with the tip of his knife. He's old enough now to help in the shop, though he still prefers playing with wooden toys over learning the finer points of gear alignment. You make a mental note to give him something simple later, a brass pin to polish, or a bit of sawdust to sweep into neat piles. Small tasks, but important ones. You unfold your napkin and spread it across your lap, the fabric rough against your calloused fingers. No fine linens here, just sturdy cotton, worn soft from years of washing. Your daughter, barely 5, reaches across the table for a piece of bread, her fingers sticky from honey spread too thickly on her morning roll. You catch her wrist gently, wiping away the excess with the corner of your sleeve before handing her another slice. There's no talk of clocks at this table. Not today. For 30 minutes, maybe 40. The only sounds are the clink of spoons against bowls, the rustle of cloth as someone shifts in their seat, the occasional murmur of conversation about the weather or the neighbor's new roof. It's a rare kind of peace, the kind that only exists when time isn't being measured, adjusted, or built from scratch. Your wife passes you a plate of warm stew, ladled generously with chunks of root vegetables and tender meat. You take it with a nod of thanks, setting it before you as steam rises in lazy curls toward the ceiling. A hunk of rye bread rests beside it, crusty on the outside, soft within. You tear off a piece and dip it into the broth, savoring the warmth as it spreads through your chest. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers ate separately from their families or shared meals together during work hours. Some records suggest craftsmen took short breaks alone, while others indicate family meals were common, especially in smaller homes where workshops doubled as living spaces. You know which side of history you fall on. This moment, right here, is more valuable than any ticking mechanism ever built. Outside, the city continues its slow awakening. A cart rattles past, its wheels groaning under the weight of fresh produce. Somewhere down the street, a dog barks once, then falls silent. But inside this room, the world is still. The only movement is the steady rise and fall of spoons, the occasional scrape of a chair leg against the floorboards, the soft murmur of your daughter humming quietly to herself as she eats. You take another bite, chewing slowly, savoring the simplicity of it all. This is what keeps you grounded. Not the precision of gears or the elegance of a well-balanced pendulum, but the warmth of a shared meal, the presence of loved ones, the quiet certainty that life moves forward even when the clocks stop for a moment. And so you eat, slowly, mindfully, with nothing but the company of those who remind you why you build time in the first place. You push back from the table with a quiet groan, your stomach full of warm stew and fresh bread, your fingers still slightly sticky from honey. The meal was simple but satisfying, the kind that settles deep in your bones and makes you feel like you could sleep for hours, if only there were time for such luxuries. No duty calls. Time waits for no one, not even those who build it by hand. As you rise, your daughter reaches for your empty bowl, her small hands eager to help. You nod in approval, ruffling her hair before stepping away from the table. Your wife catches your eye across the room, offering a knowing smile as she gathers plates and begins stacking them beside the basin. This is the rhythm of your household, quiet moments of connection followed by the steady return to work, whether in the shop or at home. You step back into the workshop, the scent of oil and wood welcoming you like an old friend. The morning light has shifted now, casting longer shadows across your bench as the sun climbs higher in the sky. You glance toward the unfinished clock case resting in the corner, its surface still bare, waiting patiently for its final shaping. But today isn't about carving wood or adjusting gears. It's about imagination. You move to the far side of the room, where a narrow shelf holds a collection of parchment, ink bottles, and quills. Some pages are covered in careful sketches, designs for past projects, notes on measurements, reminders of commissions yet to be completed. Others remain blank, their surfaces smooth and untouched, waiting for inspiration to strike. Today, you need something new, something elegant, something that will catch the eye of a nobleman who values both function and beauty. He requested a clock shaped like a lion, its body curved around the face, its tail forming the pendulum. A challenge, yes, but also an opportunity. A chance to prove that craftsmanship can be more than just mechanics. It can be art. You pull out a fresh sheet of parchment, smoothing it flat against the wooden surface. With careful hands, you dip your quill into the inkwell, shaking off the excess before setting the tip to paper. The first stroke is slow, deliberate, a sweeping curve that forms the outline of the beast's head. You sketch lightly at first, letting the lines guide you rather than forcing them into place. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers designed their own ornate cases or relied on separate artisans for decorative elements. Some believe guild restrictions limited individual expression, while others insist craftsmen took pride in every detail, including aesthetics. You know better, this is your work, your vision. If someone is going to see this piece hanging proudly in their parlor, it should carry your signature in more ways than one. You add depth to the drawing, refining the shape of the lion's mane, the curve of its back, the subtle tilt of its eyes. It needs to look alive, powerful yet dignified. Not a mere decoration, but a guardian of time itself. You imagine how the brass will catch the candlelight, how the oak will darken with age, how the chimes will echo through a grand hall when the hour strikes. A fly buzzes near the window, bouncing off the glass before drifting lazily toward the ceiling. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of creation. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world is still. Your quill moves steadily, tracing lines that will soon become reality. You don't rush. There's no need to. This is the part of the craft that few ever see. The quiet moment between thought and execution, where ideas take shape before they're carved into wood or cast in metal. And so you draw, slowly, carefully, with nothing but the scratch of ink against parchment and the steady beat of your own imagination guiding you forward. The scent of linseed oil fills your workshop, rich and nutty, mingling with the lingering traces of sawdust and wax. You hold a small cloth in one hand, soft from years of use, and dip it into the shallow tin bowl resting beside you. The oil clings to the fabric, thick and golden, spreading slowly across the fibers like honey warming in the sun. Before you, the nearly finished clock case stands upright on the workbench, its oak surface pale and unfinished, waiting for your touch. This is no ordinary wood. It's been carefully selected, seasoned for months to prevent warping, cut and shaped with precision so every joint fits snugly without gaps. But raw wood, no matter how well crafted, lacks soul. That's where the oil comes in. You press the cloth against the surface, rubbing slow, deliberate circles that follow the grain. The oil seeps into the wood, darkening it slightly, bringing out the natural patterns hidden beneath its plain exterior. Each stroke smooths the texture, filling tiny imperfections until the surface feels almost warm beneath your fingertips. It's not just about appearance. This layer of oil protects the wood from moisture, from the shifting air of your workshop, from the slow decay time brings to all things. As you work, your mind drifts back to the first time you ever polished a clock case. You had been 13, standing beside your father as he demonstrated the proper technique. Never too much pressure, always follow the grain, never rush. Wood remembers, he had said, his hands moving with practiced ease. Treat it right, and it'll last longer than any of us. You remember how eager you had been to try it yourself, how impatient you were to see results. Your first attempt had been rushed, uneven. Some spots too oily, others barely touched. Your father had shaken his head, not in anger, but in quiet disappointment. Patience, he had reminded you. This isn't just about making something look nice. It's about giving it life. You chuckle now at the memory. Back then, you had thought speed was a sign of skill. Now, you know better. True craftsmanship isn't measured in minutes or hours. It's measured in care, in attention to detail, in the willingness to let something take as long as it needs. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers used varnish or relied solely on oil finishes for their cases. Some believe early clocks were left unfinished to preserve their natural look, while others insist protective coatings were essential for longevity. Either way, you know what works best for your hands. The way oil deepens the color of oak, how it makes the grain stand out like veins in stone, how it leaves behind a surface that feels almost alive under your touch. You move around the case, working each side with the same steady rhythm. The front, where the clock face will soon be mounted. The sides, where delicate carvings wait to be revealed once the final polish is applied. The top, where dust will eventually settle, marking the passage of years. And finally, the back, plain, unassuming, yet just as important as the rest. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the motion of your task. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world is still. You set the cloth aside, inspecting your work. The case gleams softly under the morning light, its surface smooth, even, ready for the next step. Not quite complete, but getting there. You run your palm along the wood one last time, feeling the warmth beneath your fingers, the quiet promise of time yet to come. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with your hands coated in oil and your thoughts drifting like dust in the air, you are exactly where you need to be. You step back from the polished clock case, wiping your hands on a clean cloth to remove the lingering traces of linseed oil. The scent still clings to your skin, warm, nutty, familiar, as you reach for the small wooden mallet resting beside your tools. It's not much to look at, just a simple block of beech with a worn handle, but it's been in your possession for years, its weight perfectly balanced for the delicate work ahead. In front of you, the nearly assembled timepiece waits patiently. A pendulum already hanging from its mount, brass gears aligned and ready to turn, the escapement mechanism poised like a silent heartbeat. But something is missing. The chimes, though mounted, remain unadjusted. Their hammers sit motionless, their springs coiled tight but inactive. A clock without sound is like a world without wind. Too quiet, too still. You pick up one of the chime rods, holding it between your fingers like a tuning fork. It's long and slender, made of tempered steel, its surface smooth beneath your touch. You tap it lightly against the edge of your workbench, listening as it rings out. A clear, high note that fades slowly into the morning air. Good. It's in tune. For now. Clocks like this one are designed to strike the hour, their chimes echoing through homes like gentle reminders that time continues forward, whether anyone is watching or not. Some people rely on them to wake, to eat, to gather for prayer or supper. Others barely notice their presence, taking the steady rhythm for granted until silence replaces sound. Either way, it's your job to make sure they ring true. You lift the hammer assembly, adjusting its position carefully before securing it in place with a tiny screw. The metal bites into the wood, holding firm without over-tightening. Too loose, and the hammer might miss its mark. Too tight, and it could jam mid-strike. Balance is everything. Once both hammers are in place, you give the mechanism a test. With careful fingers, you nudge the escapement wheel forward, triggering the sequence. The first hammer lifts, then falls, striking the rod with a soft ding. A second later, the second hammer follows suit, producing a slightly deeper tone. Together, they create a harmonious pair of notes, one higher, one lower, repeating in perfect cadence. You listen closely, tilting your head as the sound echoes through the workshop. Not quite right. One of the tones lingers longer than the other, disrupting the symmetry. You loosen the mounting bracket slightly, shifting the angle of the hammer before tightening it again. Another test. This time, the notes blend more smoothly, ringing out in even succession. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers tuned their chimes to match local church bells, or if each maker developed their own unique tonal signature. Some believe certain workshops favored specific pitch ranges, while others insist adjustments were made based solely on customer preference. Either way, you know what sounds best. Not too sharp, not too dull, just enough to catch the ear without startling the soul. You take a step back, folding your arms across your chest as you watch the pendulum sway gently in the morning light. The chimes are set, the gears aligned, the case polished to a warm sheen. It's coming together piece by piece, each adjustment bringing it closer to completion. But there's still more to do, always more. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady, predictable, calm. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with your hands coated in oil and your ears filled with the soft ring of time itself, you are exactly where you need to be. You lean in closer, your breath catching slightly as you inspect the tiny metal arm that controls the escapement mechanism, the very heart of the clock's movement. It's a delicate piece, no larger than your thumbnail, shaped like a curved lever with a finely adjusted pivot point. Without it, the gears would spin freely, uncontrolled, and time itself would slip away like water through open fingers. This is the part that still puzzles scholars today. The Dutch were masters of precision, yet some details of their early escapement designs remain shrouded in mystery. Was this particular mechanism an original invention, or had they copied the design from an ancient manuscript smuggled in from Italy or Spain? Some historians believe these early clocks used a Virgin foliate system borrowed from medieval tower clocks, while others argue that Dutch craftsmen refined the technology independently, adapting it for smaller, household use. You know what works best for your hands. You've built dozens of these mechanisms over the years, each one a careful balance of tension and release. And yet, every time you adjust the escapement, you feel the same quiet thrill, a blend of caution and curiosity, knowing that even the smallest misalignment can throw off the entire rhythm of the clock. You reach for a fine-tipped screwdriver, its wooden handle worn smooth by years of use. With steady fingers, you loosen the tiny brass screw that holds the escapement wheel in place, just enough to allow for minor adjustments. The wheel shifts slightly beneath your touch, its teeth catching the morning light like the edge of a blade. One wrong move, and the whole mechanism could seize up before it ever begins ticking. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers kept their techniques secret or shared knowledge freely within their guilds. Some records suggest that apprentices spent years studying under master craftsmen before being allowed to work on escapement mechanisms, while others insist that certain workshops guarded their methods as closely as alchemists protected their formulas. Either way, you know that experience counts for more than theory. No amount of reading could replace the feel of a well-balanced escapement beneath your fingertips. You nudge the wheel slightly, testing the resistance. Too tight, and the pendulum won't swing freely. Too loose, and the gears might skip, causing the clock to lose time. You tighten the screw again, just a fraction, then let go. The wheel remains in place, but when you give it a gentle push, it turns smoothly, gliding into motion without hesitation. A satisfied hum escapes your lips. Good. That's the kind of adjustment that separates a decent clock from a great one. Outside, the city continues its slow awakening. A cart rattles past, its wheels groaning under the weight of fresh produce. Somewhere down the street, a dog barks once, then falls silent. But here, in your workshop, the world is still. You sit back, wiping your hands on your apron, as you watch the escapements settle into place. It looks small, almost insignificant compared to the grandeur of a finished timepiece, but you know better. This is where the magic happens. Not in the polished wood or the gleaming brass, but in the unseen mechanics that keep time moving forward, second by second, hour by hour. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with your tools in hand and the quiet hum of creation around you, you are exactly where you need to be. The knock at the door is soft but distinct, 3 polite raps that echo through the quiet of your workshop like a chime from one of your own clocks. You glance up from your bench, blinking against the morning light that slants across the room. A visitor? At this hour? You set down your screwdriver and wipe your hands on your apron before moving toward the door. The latch clicks as you lift it, and the wood groans slightly on its hinges as you pull it open. Standing before you is an older woman wrapped in a plain wool shawl, her face lined with years of wind and work. Behind her, peering around her skirts with wide eyes, is a boy young, no more than 10 or 11, his hair tousled as if he'd just woken up moments ago. He clutches a small basket to his chest, filled with what looks like fresh eggs and a few sprigs of parsley. "Good morning," the woman says, offering a polite nod. "I hope we're not interrupting." You shake your head, stepping aside to let them in. "No trouble at all," you say, holding the door open wider. Come in, come in." They step inside carefully, the boy's boots making soft thuds against the wooden floor. His eyes immediately dart to the shelves along the wall, scanning the rows of gears, tools, and half-finished mechanisms with something between curiosity and awe. You catch him staring at a brass pendulum rod resting in its cradle, his mouth slightly open. His mother clears her throat gently. "We brought these for you," she says, handing you the basket. "Fresh from our hens this morning." You take it with both hands, feeling the warmth of the eggs beneath the cloth covering. "Very kind of you," you say, setting the basket down on a nearby table. "Tell me, what brings you here so early?" She hesitates for just a moment before answering. "My son. He's been asking about clocks again. Said he wanted to see where they come from." You glance at the boy, who quickly lowers his gaze but can't hide the spark of excitement in his eyes. He shifts from foot to foot, still clutching the edge of his coat as if trying to keep himself from blurting out questions too fast. You smile. "Well then, I suppose there's no harm in showing him a bit." The boy's head snaps up, his expression lighting up. His mother gives a small, knowing chuckle. "Just don't let him touch anything," she warns lightly. You wave a hand dismissively. "No worries there. I'll make sure he knows the rules." With slow, deliberate steps, you lead them deeper into the workshop, gesturing toward the various tools and pieces scattered across your bench. "This," you say, pointing to a row of finely filed gears, "is how time moves forward. Each of these little teeth catches the next, keeping everything in perfect rhythm." The boy leans in closer, eyes wide. "Do they ever get tired?" he asks. You laugh softly. "Not unless someone makes a mistake shaping them." He nods solemnly, as if absorbing this wisdom like a young apprentice. You continue, walking them past the polished oak case that will soon house the clock you've been working on. "And this," you say, tapping the side of the wood, "will be the body of a new timepiece. It has to be strong enough to last for generations." The boy reaches out instinctively but stops himself mid-motion, glancing at his mother for permission. She gives a small nod, and he lets out a breath before turning back to you. "Do clocks dream?" he asks suddenly. You blink. "Dream?" he shrugs. "When they're quiet, when nobody's watching. Do they think about being silent forever?" You glance at his mother, who only offers a small, amused smile. Historians still argue whether children of the 17th century were encouraged to ask such philosophical questions, or if most adults simply dismissed them as fanciful nonsense. But standing here, watching the boy's eager face, you realize some things never change. Curiosity is timeless. You kneel slightly, meeting his gaze. "Maybe they do," you say quietly. "Maybe when they stop ticking, they remember every second they ever measured. Every birthday, every wedding, every quiet evening by the fire." He considers this for a long moment before nodding slowly, satisfied with the answer. After a few more minutes of looking around, the pair thanks you once more and prepare to leave. As they step back outside into the brightening day, the boy turns once more to look at your workshop, his eyes lingering on the shelves, the ticking of yesterday's success, the scent of oil and sawdust drifting through the air. As the door closes behind them, you stand for a moment in the quiet, listening to the steady rhythm of your craft surrounding you. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with the echoes of young wonder still lingering in the air, You are exactly where you need to be. The knock at the door had barely faded when another sound breaks the morning stillness. This time, not from outside, but from within your workshop. A soft ding, then a faint clatter, like something small and metallic slipping free from its place. You turn toward the source of the noise just in time to see it. A chime hammer, one of the two you so carefully adjusted earlier, has come loose. It lies now on the wooden floor beside your workbench, motionless, as if embarrassed by its own failure. You sigh, rubbing the back of your neck. Not a catastrophe, certainly. Not with all the tools and spare parts at your disposal, but still an inconvenience. Precision is everything, and even the smallest misstep can send ripples through the delicate machinery of timekeeping. A moment later, another knock comes. Firmer this time, more insistent. You glance at the door, then at the fallen hammer, weighing your options. No sense in letting whoever's out there wait. You scoop up the hammer and set it aside before crossing the room to open the door. Standing there is an older man. You recognize him immediately as Master Jan, a neighbor and fellow craftsman who specializes in bell making. He's wrapped in a heavy wool coat, despite the mildness of the morning, and his face bears the lines of someone who has spent decades shaping metal over fire. In his hands, he carries a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Good morning," he says, offering a nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting." You shake your head. "Not at all. Come in." He steps inside, brushing past you with the ease of someone who has been here many times before. His eyes scan the room briefly before settling on the bench where your latest project rests. "Still at it then?" he asks, a trace of amusement in his voice. "As always," you reply, closing the door behind him. He walks over to the bench, setting his bundle down beside your tools. "I brought something for you," he says, unwrapping the cloth with careful fingers. Beneath it lies a broken chime rod, its once smooth surface marred by a jagged crack near the base. You pick it up gently, inspecting the damage. The fracture runs nearly halfway through the metal, explaining why it failed mid-ring. You tap it lightly against the edge of the table, listening to the dull, uneven tone it produces. Definitely beyond repair. Master Jan watches you closely. "It was part of my grandfather's old clock," he explains. "Ran fine for nearly 50 years until last night. Just cracked right in the middle of the strike." You hum thoughtfully, turning the rod over in your hands. "These were made too thin," you say after a moment. "Or maybe the alloy wasn't quite right. Some metals don't hold up over time." He nods. "That's what I figured, but I've never worked with clock chimes myself. Thought maybe you could help me find a replacement, or better yet, teach me how to make one." You glance at the shelves along the wall, scanning your collection of spare rods. Most are standard sizes, meant for common household clocks. Nothing quite matches the dimensions of the damaged piece in your hand. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers ever collaborated directly with blacksmiths or bellmakers, or if such trades remain separate due to guild restrictions. Some records suggest that artisans occasionally shared knowledge across disciplines, especially when repairs required specialized expertise. Others insist that strict guild rules limited such exchanges, forcing craftsmen to rely solely on their own training. You, however, have never been one to let tradition stand in the way of progress. If someone wants to learn, you'll teach them. "I can make you a new one," you say, setting the broken rod aside. "But it'll take some time. Proper tempering is key. Rush it, and it'll crack again within months." Jan nods, clearly expecting no less. "Take all the time you need. My wife complains about the silence anyway." You chuckle. She's not wrong. A house without a ticking clock feels off. You reach for a fresh strip of tempered steel, holding it up to the light. Then, picking up your file, you begin shaping the edges, smoothing out imperfections with slow, practiced strokes. The rhythmic scrape fills the workshop once more, accompanied by the occasional murmur of conversation as you explain each step to your guest. Outside, the city continues its slow awakening. A cart rattles past, its wheels groaning under the weight of fresh produce. Somewhere down the street, a dog barks once, then falls silent. But here, in your workshop, the world is still. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with your hands coated in metal dust and the quiet hum of creation around you, you are exactly where you need to be. The scent of oil and dust lingers in the air as you turn toward the far wall, where a narrow bookshelf stands like a silent guardian of knowledge. It's not large, only 5 shelves, each lined with leather-bound volumes that have seen better days. But it holds everything you need. These aren't just books. They're records of time itself, filled with diagrams, measurements, and the wisdom of those who came before you. You run your fingers along the spines, feeling the rough texture of worn leather beneath your fingertips. Some titles are embossed in gold, though the lettering has faded over the years. Others bear no markings at all, their covers plain and unassuming, hiding secrets within their pages. You've read them all more than once, but there's always something new to learn, some forgotten detail waiting to be rediscovered. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers were considered scholars or simply skilled tradesmen. Some believe these books were treasured possessions, passed down through generations like family heirlooms. Others insist many craftsmen relied on oral tradition rather than written instruction, learning by watching and doing rather than studying from pages. Either way, you know one thing: you wouldn't last long without this collection. You pull out a thick volume bound in dark brown leather, its corners softened by years of use. The title is barely legible now, but you don't need to read it to know what it contains. This is your father's old notebook, filled with his own handwritten notes, sketches of gear trains, and careful calculations for pendulum lengths. He kept it close throughout his life, marking new discoveries in the margins, adding corrections in different colored ink as he refined his techniques. You open it carefully, the parchment crackling softly under your touch. The pages are yellowed with age, the ink slightly smudged in places where fingers have lingered too long. A sketch of an escapement mechanism takes up most of the first page, accompanied by a series of numbers and symbols only another craftsman would understand. You trace the lines with your fingertip, imagining him hunched over this very book by candlelight, making notes after a long day's work. Beside it lies a smaller, thinner book, the Horologium Mechanicum, a treatise on mechanical clocks written by a German scholar decades ago. It was expensive when you bought it, but worth every guilder. Its pages are filled with intricate drawings of clock movements, descriptions of different escapement designs, and even comparisons between various types of chime mechanisms. You remember spending entire nights poring over its contents, cross-referencing its theories with your own experience, testing its claims against the ticking reality of your workshop. You flip through the pages, pausing at a diagram of a virgin foliate system. It's one of the oldest known clock mechanisms, used in tower clocks across Europe for centuries. Your own designs have evolved beyond such simple structures, but there's still value in understanding where it all began. Every modern innovation builds upon the foundations laid by those who first dared to measure time. Another book catches your eye, a slim volume titled De Tempore et Machina, written in Latin. You can still recall the effort it took to translate its passages when you were younger, struggling through dense academic prose to uncover its insights. Some sections remain marked with small pieces of parchment, reminders of ideas you meant to revisit later. You wonder if you'll ever find the time. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady, predictable, calm. You close the book gently, running your palm over its worn cover before returning it to the shelf. Knowledge is like time itself, always moving forward, always accumulating, always waiting for someone patient enough to seek it out. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, surrounded by the wisdom of centuries past, you are exactly where you need to be. You reach for the small wooden box resting on your workbench, its lid slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of folded parchment and wax-sealed envelopes within. Letters come rarely. Most of your business is handled in person or through word-of-mouth recommendations. But when they do arrive, they carry the weight of distant thoughts, carried across miles by horseback and careful hands. You lift the box carefully, setting it before you as you loosen the final clasp that holds it shut. The wood creaks softly as you open it, releasing a faint scent of dust and aged paper. Inside, beside a few unfinished sketches and a scrap of brass wire curled like a sleeping serpent, lies a single letter addressed to you in neat, deliberate script. You recognize the handwriting immediately. Master Peter from Harlem, a fellow clockmaker, older than you by at least a decade, with a reputation for precision that borders on obsessive. You've exchanged letters before, mostly about gear ratios and pendulum weights, but never anything urgent. Still, curiosity stirs in your chest as you break the seal and unfold the parchment. The ink is dark, the lines crisp. You scan the opening greetings. Dearest fellow keeper of time, he begins, always one for dramatic flourishes, and then settle into the heart of his message. I hope this letter finds you well and your clock's running true. I write to you today with an unusual inquiry, one that may strike you as odd, but I assure you, it comes from genuine curiosity. You raise an eyebrow, already intrigued. Have you ever experimented with whalebone springs in your escapement mechanisms? A traveler passing through my shop spoke of such a thing. A timepiece built in Italy some years ago, using thin strips of whalebone instead of steel. He claimed it ran smoother, quieter, even more reliably in damp conditions. Naturally, I was skeptical, but the idea has lingered in my mind since. You pause, letting the words sink in. Whalebone springs. It is an odd suggestion. Most clockmakers rely on tempered steel for their mechanisms. Strong, predictable, reliable. Whalebone? That's something else entirely. Flexible, yes, but would it hold tension long enough to regulate movement properly? Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers ever seriously considered organic materials like whalebone for mechanical components. Some believe such ideas were dismissed outright due to availability and durability concerns, while others insist craftsmen occasionally experimented with unconventional materials, especially in coastal regions where whale products were more accessible. Either way, you know one thing, you've never tried it yourself. You set the letter aside for a moment, glancing toward the shelves where your spare springs are stored in neat rows. Thin strips of steel, each one cut and shaped by hand, each one tested for flexibility and resilience. They gleam faintly in the morning light, waiting patiently for their turn in the great machinery of time. Could whalebone really offer any advantage over them? Would it bend differently under pressure? Would it wear faster, or perhaps last longer in certain conditions? And most importantly, was it worth experimenting with? Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady. Predictable. Calm. You pick up the letter again, reading through Peter's closing remarks before folding it neatly and tucking it back into the wooden box. An idea lingers now, taking root in your mind like a seed waiting for spring. Perhaps, when time allows, you'll test the theory yourself. Order a small strip of whalebone from a trader, shape it carefully, and see how it fares against your usual materials. For now, though, there is work to be done. Clocks to finish, time to measure, gears to turn. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with a curious letter in hand and the quiet hum of creation around you, you are exactly where you need to be. Your fingers drift over the worn surface of your workbench, tracing the grain until they land on a small brass latch nestled near the edge. It's easy to miss unless you know where to look. A subtle catch hidden beneath a thin layer of dust and years of use. You press it gently, feeling the faint click as the hidden drawer slides open with a soft SHH of wood against wood. Inside, the space is shallow but neatly arranged, each item placed with purpose, each object carrying its own quiet history. A few spare screws glint in the morning light, their threads still sharp despite years of waiting. A tiny vial, no larger than your thumb, rests beside them, sealed with wax and labeled in faded ink. Essence of quiet. You chuckle softly at the absurdity of it, as if such a thing could truly exist. You lift the vial carefully, rolling it between your fingers. What even is inside? Linseed oil infused with lavender? A failed experiment in scent-based relaxation? You remember your father placing it here decades ago, though he never explained its purpose. Maybe it was just a joke, one of his many ways of reminding you that patience, like time itself, was something to be measured carefully. Beside the vial lies a folded piece of parchment, edges curled from age, corners smudged with traces of soot and ink. You unfold it slowly, revealing a delicate sketch of a pocket watch. Its face round, its hands slender, its casing engraved with intricate floral patterns. The drawing is elegant, almost dreamlike in its precision, but what catches your eye is the signature scrawled in the bottom right corner. JVDW, 1602. Your grandfather. He had always been more of an artist than a craftsman, known for designing elaborate clock faces that adorned the homes of wealthy patrons. This must have been one of his early concepts, never built, never commissioned, just imagined into existence with ink and ambition. You wonder if he ever saw this design realized, or if it remained trapped forever within these pages, ticking silently in the mind of its creator. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers kept personal journals or sketches tucked away in hidden compartments like this one. Some believe such items were rare, given the practical nature of the trade. Others insist that every serious craftsman had at least one secret drawer filled with unfinished ideas, forgotten tools, and mementos from a life spent measuring seconds. You set the sketch aside and reach for another item resting in the drawer. A compass, its brass arms dulled slightly by time but still sturdy in your grip. You turn it slowly, watching how the needle wavers briefly before settling into place. Your father used this when he was younger, aligning gears and marking measurements with the same steady hand that once guided your first attempts at craftsmanship. You've kept it not because you need it, you have newer, finer instruments now, but because it reminds you of where you came from. A loose shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of memory. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady, predictable, calm. You close the drawer gently, pressing the latch until it clicks back into place. The bench remains as it always has, tools in their rightful spots, gears stacked neatly, chimes waiting patiently for their next strike. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with secrets safely tucked away and memories lingering like dust in the air, you are exactly where you need to be. You reach for the small block of boxwood resting on your workbench, its surface smooth beneath your fingers, slightly cool despite the warmth of the morning air. This is no ordinary timber. It's been carefully selected for its fine grain and durability, perfect for shaping the tiny wooden pegs that will soon hold your latest clock together. A single mistake could mean a weakened joint, a misaligned gear, or worse, a peg that snaps under pressure when least expected. With deliberate care, you lift your knife, testing its edge against the pad of your thumb. Sharp enough. Good. You've used this blade for years, its handle worn smooth by countless hours of carving. Its steel still strong despite the occasional nick from pressing too hard. It's a tool you trust, one that has shaped time as surely as any pendulum ever has. You position the block of boxwood against the bench hook, securing it in place before making your first cut. The blade bites into the wood with quiet precision, peeling away thin curls that spiral onto the floor like delicate shavings of gold dust. Each motion is slow, controlled, no rushing, no hesitation. Too much force and you risk splitting the grain. Too little and the peg won't take shape properly. The scent of fresh cut wood fills your lungs, mingling with the lingering traces of linseed oil and brass dust in the air. There's something deeply satisfying about this, watching raw material transform into something useful, something essential. A clock may be built of metal and gears, but without wooden pins to hold everything in place, it would fall apart before it ever began ticking. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers preferred wooden or metal pegs for their mechanisms. Some believe early craftsmen relied heavily on wood due to its availability and ease of carving, while others insist metal fasteners became more common as ironworking techniques improved. Either way, you know what works best for your hands, Wood absorbs movement better than rigid steel, allowing for subtle shifts without compromising stability. As you work, your mind drifts back to the first time you ever carved a peg by hand. You had been 15, standing beside your father as he guided your grip around the knife's handle. "Too deep," he had warned, adjusting your wrist. Wood remembers mistakes. You had frowned in concentration, determined to get it right. And when you finally did, when the peg slid smoothly into place and held firm, you had felt something shift inside you. That was the moment you truly understood. Craftsmanship wasn't just about building things. It was about patience, about letting time do the work. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of creation. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady. Predictable, calm. You set aside the finished peg, inspecting it under the morning light. Perfectly round, smooth along the edges, ready to serve its purpose without complaint. You reach for another block of boxwood, settling into the familiar cadence of your craft once more. And so you carve, slowly, carefully, with nothing but the whisper of blade against wood and the steady beat of your own heartbeat guiding you forward. The scent of stew still lingers in your clothes as you return to the workshop, stepping carefully over the scattered remnants of your morning's labor. The sun has climbed higher now, casting longer shadows across the wooden floor, and the air feels heavier with the warmth of the day settling in. You move slowly, deliberately, no rush, no urgency. There will be time enough for ticking gears and swinging pendulums soon enough. For now, dinner waits on your lap. You settle onto your stool, a bowl of thick, steaming broth cradled in one hand, while the other grips a hunk of rye bread torn fresh from this morning's loaf. The stew is hearty, root vegetables softened by hours of simmering, chunks of meat that fall apart at the gentlest nudge of your spoon. You blow across the surface before taking your first bite, savoring the warmth as it spreads through your chest. The workshop hums quietly around you, the distant tick-tick of yesterday's success, the faint creak of floorboards beneath your shifting weight, the occasional whisper of wind sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. It's not silence, not really. Just the kind of quiet that only exists when you're surrounded by things that move at their own pace, untouched by the rush of the outside world. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze like a tiny leaf caught in an unseen current. You let it pass without comment, focusing instead on the slow rhythm of your meal. No need to hurry. There's no clock watching you here, only the steady, unspoken agreement between man and craft that work will continue when it must. Historians still argue whether Dutch craftsmen ate alone or shared meals with apprentices or family members in the middle of their workday. Some records suggest that workshops doubled as living spaces, where meals were taken amidst tools and unfinished projects. Others insist that strict guild rules enforce separation between personal and professional life. Either way, you know what works best for you. There's something grounding about eating in the place where you build time, as if the act itself reminds you that life isn't just measured in seconds and minutes, but in warm bowls of food and quiet moments of reflection. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady. Predictable, calm. You tear off another piece of bread, dipping it into the broth before bringing it to your lips. The bread soaks up the warmth, softening against your tongue, and for a moment, you close your eyes, letting the simple pleasure settle deep in your bones. This is the part of the day that never makes it into history books. No grand discoveries here, no revolutionary inventions, no dramatic turning points. Just a craftsman, a bowl of stew, and the quiet certainty that tomorrow will come whether or not the clocks keep perfect time. And so you eat, slowly, mindfully, with nothing but the gentle hum of creation surrounding you like a lullaby. The last bite of bread is gone. the bowl now empty save for a few lingering drops of broth clinging to its edges. You set it aside with care, wiping your hands on your apron before reaching for the small brass hammer resting near your tools. This weight is familiar in your palm, solid, dependable, worn smooth by years of use. Before you, the nearly completed clock stands upright on the workbench, its polished oak case gleaming softly in the afternoon light. The pendulum sways gently, casting faint shadows that shift with each passing second. The chimes are mounted, their rods aligned, but something still feels off. Not broken, not malfunctioning, just not quite right. You reach for the small wooden mallet, tapping lightly against one of the chime hammers. It lifts smoothly, striking the rod with a clear ding, then falls back into place with a soft click. Good. But when you listen closely, you realize the note doesn't quite match the rhythm of the church bell that rings from the nearby tower every Sunday morning. That's the sound people expect, the tone they recognize as time itself marking the hour. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers tuned their chimes to local church bells or simply followed general pitch standards. Some believe regional variations existed, with clocks in Haarlem ringing differently than those in Rotterdam. Others insist craftsmen relied on mathematical ratios rather than auditory harmony, adjusting tension and length based on calculations rather than sound. Either way, you know what sounds best. Not too sharp, not too dull, just enough to catch the ear without startling the soul. You adjust the hammer's position slightly, loosening the tiny screw that holds it in place. Quarter turn, no more. Then, another test. This time, the note lingers a little longer, blending more smoothly with the ambient hum of the workshop. Better. Not perfect yet, but getting there. You move to the second chime, repeating the process with the same careful precision. The hammer lifts, strikes, and returns, its tone slightly deeper than the first. Together, they create a harmonious pair of notes, one higher, one lower, repeating in perfect cadence. You tap them again, listening intently as the sound echoes through the room. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady. Predictable. Calm. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of adjustment. You take a step back, folding your arms across your chest as you watch the pendulum sway gently in the afternoon light. The chimes are set, the gears aligned, the case polished to a warm sheen. It's coming together piece by piece, each adjustment bringing it closer to completion. But there's still more to do, always more. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with your ears filled with the soft ring of time itself, you are exactly where you need to be. Your fingers drift over the smooth surface of the clock case, tracing the grain of the oak beneath your fingertips. The linseed oil has done its job well, darkening the wood just enough to bring out its natural depth, smoothing every imperfection until it gleams like polished stone beneath the afternoon light. It's almost finished now, just one last touch needed before the timepiece is truly yours to claim. You reach for a small chisel, its blade narrow and precise, honed to a fine edge that will carve meaning into this piece long after it leaves your hands. This isn't just about function anymore, it's about legacy. Every craftsman marks their work in some way, whether with initials, symbols, or hidden details only another maker would recognize. Some do it for pride, others for posterity. You do it because you know, someday, someone will look at this clock and wonder who shaped its gears, who carved its frame, who gave it life with steady hands and patient breath. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers signed their work openly or used coded markings known only to fellow craftsmen. Some believe official guild records required clear identification, while others insist many artisans preferred subtle engravings tucked away in corners where only the most curious eyes would find them. Either way, you know what feels right. Something personal, something quiet, something that says I was here without demanding attention. You position the chisel carefully against the lower right corner of the cabinet door, angling it just so. A single breath, then gentle pressure as the blade bites into the wood, carving deep but never too far. First, the letter J, then V, and finally, a flourish at the end. A tiny curl that turns the initials into something more than just letters. A signature, yes, but also a whisper of artistry in a craft often mistaken for pure mechanics. The scent of fresh cut wood rises faintly around you, mingling with the lingering traces of oil and brass dust in the air. You lift the chisel slightly, wiping away the shavings before inspecting your work under the shifting light. The engraving is shallow but distinct, barely visible unless someone leans in close. Perfect. Not showy, not hidden, just right. As you work, your mind drifts back to the first time you ever carved your name into a finished piece. You had been 20, nervous and uncertain, afraid that signing your work would feel arrogant rather than earned. Your father had watched in silence as you hesitated, then simply said, "If you don't mark it, someone else will think they made it." That was all the encouragement you needed. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of creation. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady. Predictable. Calm. You set the chisel aside, running your fingertip lightly over the engraved initials. They are small, unassuming, but they belong to you. And when this clock finds its new home, ticking steadily in someone's parlor for generations to come, those 3 little letters will remain, a quiet testament to the hands that built it. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with history etched into wood and time waiting patiently to be measured, you are exactly where you need to be. The scent of oil and dust lingers in the air as you reach for the small brass dial resting on your workbench. It's nearly finished. Its face smooth, its markings carefully etched by hand. But there's still one final adjustment to make. Tonight's moon is a crescent, delicate and faint against the sky, and your clock must reflect that. A timepiece should not only measure hours, it should mirror the heavens themselves. You lift the dial carefully, turning it so the afternoon light catches along its edges. The moon phase indicator sits at the lower half of the face, a small circular aperture framed by delicate engravings of stars and clouds. Behind it, a rotating disk waits patiently, its painted surface depicting the full cycle of lunar phases, from new moon to full, from waxing to waning. All it needs now is alignment. With steady fingers, you loosen the tiny screw that holds the disc in place, just enough to allow for minor adjustments. This part requires patience. Too much force, and the mechanism could shift unpredictably. Too little, and it might never keep accurate time with the actual moon above. You glance toward the window, where the real crescent hangs in the pale blue sky, its shape mirrored in the engraving before you. You remember the first time you ever set a moon phase dial. It had taken you hours, maybe even days, to get it right. Your father had watched in silence as you fumbled with the gears, then finally said, "The moon doesn't rush. Why should you?" That lesson stuck with you more than any technical instruction ever could. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers used astronomical charts or relied solely on observation when setting moon phase indicators. Some believe craftsmen consulted detailed almanacs to ensure accuracy, while others insist most relied on simple calculations passed down through guild traditions. Either way, you know what works best for your hands: experience, intuition, and a quiet reverence for the sky itself. You nudge the disc slightly, aligning the painted crescent with the aperture. Then, holding your breath, you tighten the screw just enough to hold it firm without over-tightening. A quick test. You rotate the mechanism forward, watching as the moon shifts from crescent to full, then back again. Smooth, even, perfect. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady. Predictable. Calm. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of creation. You set the dial aside, already imagining how it will look once the clock is complete. How the soft glow of candlelight will catch on the brass. How the moon will shift subtly with each passing night. How someone, somewhere, will glance at this timepiece and feel the quiet pull of celestial time. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with the heavens reflected in metal and time waiting patiently to be measured, you are exactly where you need to be. The final pieces rest before you like a puzzle waiting to be solved. The polished oak case stands upright, its darkened grain catching the afternoon light in warm, golden hues. The brass gears gleam faintly on your workbench, each one carefully filed and oiled, ready to find its place in the delicate dance of time. The pendulum sways gently in its mount, casting soft shadows that stretch across the floorboards like whispered secrets. This is the moment everything has been leading toward, the quiet culmination of weeks, maybe even months of careful labor. You've measured, carved, adjusted, and refined every component with the precision of someone who knows that even the smallest mistake can throw off an entire mechanism. Now it's time to bring it all together. You lift the main movement plate first, feeling its weight settle comfortably in your hands. It's heavier than it looks, solid brass with carefully drilled holes where each gear and pin will soon find its home. With slow, deliberate movements, you position it against the back panel of the clock case, aligning it just so before securing it with the first wooden peg. The peg slides in smoothly, no resistance, just the satisfying click of craftsmanship meeting intention. You set it aside and reach for the next piece. The escapement wheel, its teeth sharp and even beneath your fingertips. This is the heart of the mechanism, the part that will regulate the steady release of energy from the descending weight, ensuring that each second passes with perfect rhythm. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers assembled their mechanisms in a single session or worked in stages, testing components before final assembly. Some records suggest that master craftsmen preferred to build in sections, ensuring each part functioned independently before committing to the whole. Others insist that true skill lay in assembling everything at once, trusting that years of experience would guide each placement without error. Either way, you know what works best for your hands: patience, precision, and the quiet certainty that comes from knowing each piece belongs exactly where it lands. One by one, the gears follow, each one clicking into place with the same gentle finality as the last. The great wheel holding the coiled spring of potential motion. The center wheel turning slowly but surely with each passing minute. The third and fourth wheels spinning in harmony with the rhythm of time itself. You test each connection as you go, making sure there are no hiccups in the flow, no unnecessary friction that might wear down the gears too soon. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady, predictable, calm. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of creation. You lift the front plate now, lowering it carefully over the assembled gears until it settles into place with a soft thud. A few more wooden pegs, a handful of tiny screws, each one tightened just enough to hold firm without stifling movement. The mechanism is nearly complete, waiting only for the final touches before it truly comes to life. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with metal and wood joining in perfect harmony, you are exactly where you need to be. The final screw is in place. The last wooden peg has been tapped gently into its hole. The clock's movement rests within the polished oak case like a heart settling into its rightful place, waiting for the first breath of motion to bring it to life. You sit back on your stool, hands still resting lightly on the edge of the workbench, fingers dusted with fine brass shavings and the lingering scent of linseed oil. Your pulse feels slow, steady, like the pendulum that now hangs suspended above you, perfectly still, waiting for permission to begin. This is the moment. Not the carving of wood or the filing of gears, not the careful alignment of chimes or the quiet engraving of initials. This is when it all comes together, the point where craftsmanship meets time itself. With careful fingers, you reach for the small latch that holds the pendulum in place. You've tested this before, yes, but never with the full mechanism engaged. Never with every gear aligned just so, every spring coiled in anticipation. One wrong move and the entire system could seize up. But you know better than to rush. A deep breath, a steadying exhale. Then, with the gentlest nudge of your fingertip, you release the pendulum. It swings forward, slow, deliberate, almost hesitant, as if testing the air around it. Then, as gravity takes hold, it begins its return journey, gliding smoothly through the space between ticks. The escapement will catches. A soft click echoes through the workshop, barely louder than the rustle of wind sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. Another swing, another click, then another, and then it lives. The gears turn, the wheels spin, the rhythm settles into place like a heartbeat finding its pace after a long silence. The sound is subtle, almost hypnotic. Tick-tock, tick-tock, filling the room with something deeper than just motion, with presence, with purpose. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers celebrated the first successful tick of a new timepiece or simply moved on to their next project without ceremony. Some records suggest craftsmen kept journals of each completed clock, noting its performance in the days following assembly. Others insist such moments were too personal to document, meant only for the maker's own satisfaction. Either way, you know what this means, not just the completion of a task, but the birth of something that will outlive you. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady. Predictable, calm. You watch the pendulum sway, mesmerized by its effortless grace. It doesn't rush. It doesn't hesitate. It simply follows the pull of gravity, ticking forward like a lullaby sung in perfect rhythm. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with time unfolding beneath your fingertips, you are exactly where you need to be. Your fingers hover over the brass faceplate for a moment, feeling the cool smoothness of its surface beneath your fingertips. The clock is alive now, its gears turning, its pendulum swinging, its quiet rhythm filling the workshop like a heartbeat you can hear but not yet see. But something still feels unfinished. A timepiece may tick and chime, but until it carries the mark of its maker, it remains anonymous. A soul without a name. You reach for the engraving tool, its tip sharpened to a fine point, and position it carefully near the lower edge of the plate. This is where your signature will go. Not bold or boastful, but clear enough for those who know how to look. You take a steady breath, steadying your hand against the bench's edge before pressing down just enough to carve the first letter. The blade bites into the metal with a soft scratch, leaving behind the faint outline of a J. You adjust your grip slightly, angling the tool for the next stroke. Then comes the V, its lines clean and deliberate, followed by a final flourish at the end. A small curl that turns simple initials into something more than just letters. A signature, yes, but also a whisper of artistry in a craft often mistaken for pure mechanics. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers signed their work openly or used coded markings known only to fellow craftsmen. Some believe official guild records required clear identification, while others insist many artisans preferred subtle engravings tucked away in corners where only the most curious eyes would find them. Either way, you know what feels right. Something personal, something quiet, something that says I was here without demanding attention. As you work, your mind drifts back to the first time you ever carved your name into a finished piece. You had been 20, nervous and uncertain, afraid that signing your work would feel arrogant rather than earned. Your father had watched in silence as you hesitated, then simply said, "If you don't mark it, someone else will think they made it." That was all the encouragement you needed. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of creation. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady. Predictable, Calm. You lift the engraving tool slightly, wiping away the fine brass dust that has gathered along the edges of your work. The initials are there now, etched deep enough to last centuries, shallow enough to remain humble. They sit neatly beside the Roman numerals, almost blending into the design itself, as if they had always belonged. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with history carved into metal and time ticking steadily around you, you are exactly where you need to be. The clock stands before you now, its polished oak case gleaming in the afternoon light, its brass faceplate engraved with steady hands, its pendulum swinging with the quiet certainty of something that will outlive you. It is finished, not just assembled, not just tested, but truly complete. And soon it will leave your workshop behind. You reach for the linen cloth resting near your tools, shaking it out gently before wrapping it carefully around the timepiece. The fabric is soft, worn from years of use, its edges frayed from countless journeys like this one. It's not just protection. It's a kind of farewell, a gentle reminder that even the most carefully crafted things must eventually move on. With slow, deliberate movements, you lift the clock from your workbench, feeling its weight settle comfortably in your arms. It's heavier than it looks, solid and reassuring, like holding a piece of history that hasn't yet been lived. You carry it carefully across the workshop, stepping over scattered shavings and forgotten screws as you make your way toward the door. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers personally delivered their finished pieces or relied on apprentices or merchants to handle transportation. Some records suggest that master craftsmen preferred to oversee every step, ensuring their work reached its new home in perfect condition. Others insist that once a commission was completed, it became someone else's responsibility, another transaction in the long chain of trade. Either way, you know what feels right. This clock has been yours since the first measurement was drawn, since the first gear was filed, since the first tick echoed through your workshop. Letting it go deserves a moment of care. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady. Predictable, calm. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of letting go. You step outside into the golden warmth of the afternoon, blinking against the sudden brightness. A cart rattles past nearby, its wooden wheels groaning under the weight of fresh produce. Somewhere down the street, a dog barks once, then falls silent. Life continues as it always does. At the edge of your property, a figure waits, dressed in fine wool, standing beside a horse-drawn carriage meant for transporting goods rather than passengers. The nobleman's servant. He nods politely as you approach, offering a small bow before reaching for the wrapped clock in your arms. You hesitate for just a moment longer than necessary, cradling the timepiece like a child about to take its first steps. Then, with a deep breath, you hand it over. Handle it with care. You say, more to yourself than to him. He nods solemnly. Of course. As he places the clock into the carriage, securing it among straw and padding, you watch in silence. Another chapter begins for this piece. Not in your hands, but in someone else's life. It will sit proudly in a grand parlor, marking hours over meals and conversations, ticking steadily through birthdays and farewells. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with your creation moving forward into the world, you are exactly where you need to be. The clock is gone now. The nobleman's servant has taken it, cradled in linen and straw, bound for a parlor where hands other than yours will dust its polished oak case and admire the steady rhythm of its ticking heart. You watch the carriage roll away down the cobbled street, its wheels groaning under the weight of your craftsmanship, until it disappears around a corner and out of sight. And just like that, the space on your workbench feels emptier. You step back inside the workshop, closing the door behind you with a quiet thud. The scent of oil and sawdust still lingers in the air, unchanged, but something about the room feels different, quieter, somehow, as if the absence of the clock has left behind a silence only those who build time can truly understand. You move to your bench, running your fingers lightly over the wooden surface. A few stray shavings remain from the final carving, tiny curls of oak that escaped the morning's sweep. A brass gear rests beside them, waiting patiently for its next home. And near the edge, the engraving tool lies exactly where you left it, its tip still sharp, ready for another name to be etched into history. But for now, there's nothing more to do. You exhale slowly, letting the weight of completion settle into your bones. It always feels this way after finishing a piece. Not relief, not excitement, but something quieter, a kind of hollow satisfaction, like the moment after a long-held breath finally releases. The work is done. The gears turn. The pendulum swings. And yet, a question lingers at the edge of your thoughts. Did I get it right? Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers ever doubted their own work once it left their hands. Some believe craftsmen took pride in every finished commission, confident in their skill. Others suggest even the most experienced makers sometimes wondered if they had tightened a screw too much or filed a gear too little, if some small imperfection might one day cause the clock to falter. You know better than to assume perfection. No matter how carefully you measured, how precisely you carved, how gently you adjusted the escapement mechanism, there will always be variables beyond your control. Changes in temperature, shifts in humidity, the wear of time itself. Once the clock is in someone else's hands, it moves forward without you. A fly buzzes lazily near the window, bouncing off the glass before drifting toward the ceiling. You watch it for a moment, then glance at the shelves along the wall. Tools hang in neat rows, each one worn by years of use, each one carrying the memory of past projects and future ones yet to come. There will always be another clock to build, another commission to fulfill. But today, at least, the work is done. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady, predictable, calm. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with your creation moving forward into the world and your hands finally at rest, you are exactly where you need to be. The workshop is quiet now, but not silent. The faint tick-tick of yesterday's success still echoes from the shelf, a steady heartbeat keeping time in the background. A breeze sneaks in through the cracks in the shutters, stirring the fine dust that clings to your workbench like powdered stardust. It swirls briefly in the afternoon light before settling again, as if reluctant to leave. You glance around, taking in the familiar disorder. The scattered shavings curling like fallen leaves, the smudges of oil on your apron, the faint scent of linseed lingering in the air. Every project leaves its mark, and this one is no different. But unlike the clock you just finished, which now journeys toward its new home, these remnants remain with you. Tiny traces of labor that won't be swept away just yet. Your hands feel lighter without the weight of tools, your fingers slightly stiff from hours of careful carving and precise adjustments. You flex them slowly, feeling the dull ache settle into your knuckles. Not pain exactly, just the kind of tiredness that comes from shaping time itself, piece by piece, until it ticks steadily beneath your fingertips. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers took breaks between projects or dove straight into the next commission. Some records suggest craftsmen allowed themselves a day or two to rest, giving their eyes and hands a chance to recover. Others insist there was never enough time for such luxuries, especially when guild deadlines loomed and wealthy patrons expected perfection within strict schedules. Either way, you know what feels right. There's value in stepping back, even if only for an hour or two. Letting the dust settle, letting the silence stretch. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of stillness. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady, predictable, calm. You reach for the small wooden brush resting near your tools, running its bristles lightly over the bench's surface. Dust rises in soft clouds, catching the sunlight before drifting lazily downward again. You don't sweep everything away, not yet. Some of it stays behind, clinging to the edges of your workspace like memories that refuse to fade. Each tiny particle tells a story. The curve of a carved gear, the imprint of a filed edge, the ghost of a chisel stroke that once shaped something meant to last centuries. As you work, your mind drifts back to the first time you ever cleaned up after finishing a clock. You had been 22, eager and restless, convinced that the moment a timepiece left your hands, it was time to start the next one. Your father had stopped you mid-sweep, placing a hand on your shoulder. "Let it breathe," he had said. "Even time needs a moment to settle." You hadn't understood him then. Now, years later, you do. And so, you move slowly, deliberately, brushing away the worst of the debris while leaving behind the softer traces of your labor. No rush, no urgency, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that even in stillness, you are still creating, still shaping the space where the next clock will one day take form. And so, you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, surrounded by the echoes of completed work and the gentle hum of dust in the air, you are exactly where you need to be. You lean back against your stool, arms resting lightly on your knees, fingers still dusted with fine brass shavings and the lingering scent of linseed oil. The workshop hums quietly around you, the steady tick-tick of yesterday's success, the faint creak of floorboards beneath your shifting weight, the occasional whisper of wind sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. It's not silence, not really. Just the kind of quiet that only exists when you're surrounded by things that move at their own pace, untouched by the rush of the outside world. Your mind drifts, not toward tomorrow's work or the next commission waiting to be started, but deeper into the heart of what you do. Time. Not just the ticking kind, measured in seconds and minutes, but the kind that settles into wood and metal, the kind that lingers in the air like dust caught in sunlight. You've spent years shaping it, carving it, polishing it until it gleams. But have you ever truly understood it? Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers saw themselves as philosophers or simply skilled tradesmen. Some believe these craftsmen were deeply aware of the abstract nature of time, contemplating its passage as they built mechanisms meant to outlive them. Others insist most focus solely on function, treating their work as a practical craft rather than an intellectual pursuit. Either way, you know one thing, you've always felt something more than mere mechanics in this work. A reverence, a rhythm, a quiet understanding that time is not just something to be measured, it's something to be felt. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady, predictable, calm. A stray shaving drifts past your ankle, carried by the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks in the shutters. You ignore it, lost in the rhythm of reflection. You think about the clocks you've built over the years, the ones that sit proudly in grand homes, marking hours over meals and conversations. The ones tucked away in quiet corners, ticking steadily through birthdays and farewells. The ones that have long since fallen silent, their gears worn thin by time itself. Each one was shaped by your hands, guided by knowledge passed down through generations. And yet, none of them truly belong to you anymore. They live their own lives now, moving forward without you. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with your thoughts drifting like dust in the air and the quiet hum of creation surrounding you, you are exactly where you need to be. The last of the daylight slips away beyond the rooftops, casting your workshop into a soft golden twilight. The candle on your workbench still waits unlit, its wax smooth and untouched, but you don't reach for it yet. There's still enough light filtering through the narrow window to see by, just barely, and you find yourself reluctant to disturb the quiet with flame. You rise slowly from your stool, stretching your arms above your head as your joints creak like one of your own unfinished mechanisms. The day has stretched long behind you, measured in ticks and tocks rather than hours, and now it's time to close the door on another piece of work well done. No rush, no urgency, just the steady rhythm of winding down. Your boots make soft thuds against the wooden floor as you move toward the shelves, where tools hang in neat rows, each one worn by years of use, each one carrying the memory of past projects and future ones yet to come. You run your fingers lightly along their handles, feeling the familiar grooves shaped by your grip over countless days. A chisel rests slightly out of place, its edge catching the fading light. You reach for it, tucking it back into its proper spot with practiced ease. Historians still argue whether Dutch clockmakers kept strict routines or let their work dictate the flow of their days. Some records suggest craftsmen followed rigid schedules, rising before dawn and working until nightfall without pause. Others insist flexibility was key, allowing time to breathe between tasks, adjusting pace according to the demands of precision. Either way, you know what works best for your hands. There is no true end to this craft, only moments of rest between creations. A fly buzzes lazily near the window, bouncing off the glass before drifting toward the ceiling. You watch it for a moment, then turn your attention to the small oil lamp resting on the shelf beside your tools. With careful fingers, you lift it, checking the level of fuel inside before reaching for a match. A quick strike, a flicker of flame, and soon the wick catches, casting warm, golden light that stretches across the room in long, slow shadows. One by one, you begin extinguishing the other sources of light, blowing out candles, closing shutters against the evening breeze, letting the glow of your lamp guide you through the final motions of the day. Each step feels deliberate, unhurried, like the ticking of a clock winding down to silence. Outside, the city continues its slow hum, merchants calling to customers, children chasing each other down cobbled streets, the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the air. But here, in your workshop, the world moves differently. Not faster, not slower, just steady, predictable, calm. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, with your tools at rest and the gentle hum of lamplight around you, you are exactly where you need to be. The lamplight casts long, gentle shadows across the workshop as you move toward your sleeping quarters, the steady tick-tick of yesterday's success still echoing softly in the background. The clock you built earlier today has already left your hands, but its rhythm lingers in your bones, a quiet imprint of hours spent shaping time with careful fingers and patient breath. You step into the small adjoining room, where wooden beams stretch overhead like the ribs of an old ship, and the scent of aged wood and linseed oil follows you like a familiar ghost. A narrow bed sits against one wall, its woolen blankets neatly folded despite the day's labor. You pull back the covers slowly, letting the fabric settle before easing yourself onto the mattress. It's firm beneath your weight, worn from years of use, but it holds you like an old friend, solid, dependable, waiting. Outside, the city drifts into its quieter rhythm. The distant laughter of children fades into murmured conversations, then into silence. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, a church bell rings once, marking the hour in a slow, deliberate chime that seems to stretch through the air like a lullaby sung in another language. You listen, letting each note settle into the space around you before closing your eyes. A soft breeze sneaks in through the cracks in the shutters, carrying with it the faint scent of damp stone and distant fires. It stirs the edges of your blanket slightly, just enough to remind you that the world is still turning, even as you prepare to let go of the day. You exhale slowly, feeling the tension ease from your shoulders, your hands, the tight curve of your lower back where hours of work have left their mark. There will be new projects tomorrow, new gears to file, new weights to balance, new moments of quiet satisfaction nestled between the ticking of unfinished timepieces. But for now, there is only this: the hush of night settling over your workshop, the rhythmic hum of life moving forward outside these walls, and the gentle pull of sleep tugging at the edges of your awareness. Historians still argue whether Dutch craftsmen truly rested after long days of labor or if they lay awake, replaying every detail of their work in their minds. Some records suggest that artisans often dreamed of mechanisms, seeing gear trains and pendulums even behind closed eyelids. Others insist exhaustion won out in the end, pulling even the most dedicated minds into deep, dreamless rest. Tonight, you fall somewhere in between. Your body sinks deeper into the mattress, muscles loosening with each slow breath. The sound of the ticking clock in the other room grows softer, more distant, blending into the quiet hum of the night. Not loud enough to keep you awake. Not silent enough to forget that time continues forward, steady and sure. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, because in this moment, wrapped in warmth and surrounded by the echoes of measured seconds, you are exactly where you need to be. The ticking grows softer, like a lullaby played at half volume. Not loud enough to keep you awake. Not quiet enough to disappear entirely. It's the kind of sound that doesn't demand attention. It simply exists, steady and sure, like the breath of someone sleeping beside you. Your body feels heavier now, sinking deeper into the mattress as your limbs loosen with each slow exhale. The day's work curls away at the edges of your mind, unraveling thread by thread until all that remains is the gentle rhythm of your own heartbeat, matching pace with the unseen pendulum somewhere in the workshop beyond this room. Outside, the city has gone still. No more distant voices, no more rattling carts or barking dogs. Just the occasional creak of wood settling in the walls, the faint sigh of wind slipping through the cracks in the shutters. You listen to it all, not with effort, but with the ease of someone who has nothing left to chase. You shift slightly beneath the blankets, adjusting your weight just enough to find comfort without breaking the spell of sleep already wrapping around you like a warm wool shawl. The scent of linseed oil lingers faintly in the air, mingling with the coolness of the night, turning memory into something almost tangible, something you can feel drifting just beneath your skin. Historians still argue whether Dutch craftsmen truly rested after long days of labor or if they lay awake, replaying every detail of their work in their minds. Some records suggest that artisans often dreamed of mechanisms, seeing gear trains and pendulums even behind closed eyelids. Others insist exhaustion won out in the end, pulling even the most dedicated minds into deep, dreamless rest. Tonight, you fall somewhere in between. You don't fight it. You don't try to hold on to the details of the clock you finished earlier today. Let it go. Let it live its life in someone else's home, ticking steadily through birthdays, dinners, and quiet evenings by the fire. That part of your journey is over for now. Instead, you let yourself drift, carried forward by the hush of night and the soft hum of time moving on without hurry. Your thoughts blur gently at the edges, dissolving into the warmth of the bed beneath you, the steady rhythm of the world outside, the slow, deep rise and fall of your own breath. And so you breathe, deeply, slowly, and then nothing but silence.